The Greeks. A people glorious and arrogant, valiant and headstrong. These were the men and women who laid the very foundations of Western civilization. Their monuments still recall perhaps the most extraordinary 2 centuries in history. A time which saw the birth of science and politics, philosophy, literature and drama. Which saw the creation of art and architecture we still strive to equal. And the Greeks achieved all this against a backdrop of war and conflict. For they would vanquish armies, navies, empires many times their size, and build an empire of their own which stretched across the Mediterranean. For one brief moment, the mighty warships of the Greeks ruled the seas, their prosperity unequaled. These achievements which still shape our world, were made not by figures lost to time, but by men and women whose voices we can still hear, whose lives we can still follow. Men such as Themistocles, one of the world's greatest military generals. Pericles, a politician of vision and genius. And Socrates, the most famous philosopher in history. This is the story of these astonishing individuals, of the rise and fall of a civilization that changed the world.
Now let us look at Greece before its most famous era. Archaic Greece was Greece's slow and painful rise from the Dark Ages. During this age, things like the polis and philosophy and written language started to become part of Greek culture. At the beginning of the Archaic period, the polis was at risk of collapse. The population was booming and the crops were failing. By 600 BC, almost all farmers in Athens were dispossessed and were slaves on their own land. The aristocratic families of Greece disregarded the farmers and focused on their own wealth. Eventually, the commoners of Greece were able to accumulate enough wealth to rise up against them. As reactions to these many problems, colonization with the spread of Greek culture influencing future history increased and terrorists began to take over portions of Greece. Eventually, though, things brightened up and people such as Solon, Homer, and Pythagoras brightened up the era with revolutionary social reforms, epics like the Iliad, and innovations in math. The most famous Greek era is the Classical era. Classic Greece is known for rulers such as Pericles and Cleisthenes. Athens at this point had just ended Hippias, the cruel tyrant's regime, with the help of Sparta. Sparta was ruled by 2 kings in a diarchy. After helping overthrow Hippias, Sparta installed Cleomenes I as the ruler until Cleisthenes took power. Under Cleisthenes, modern democracy took shape, with numerous reforms including the end of favoritism based on location. Under him, many positions were chosen by lot, not heredity, and individuals had much more to say in government. Later in the era, the Persian Wars began when Persia took over Ionia. Persia continued to grow but had many setbacks, such as the navy being thrashed by a storm and a main general getting injured. The infamous Battle of Marathon, when the Greeks defeated the Persian army, and the Battle of Thermopylae, when a few hundred Greeks stood against thousands of Persians and held them off for a week, happened during the wars.
Persians! Come and get them! Hold! Give them nothing, but take from them everything! Stay!
Athens was captured and burned, but the Athenians had evacuated by then and forced the Persians out in the legendary Battle of Salamis, defeating the much bigger Persian navy right before Xerxes' eyes. Later, the Athenians pushed the Persians even farther back, going as far as Byzantium. Soon after, the Delian League formed, while Sparta sank back into seclusion. About 40 years later, the Peloponnesian Wars began between the Spartan League and the Delian League. Small battles happened on and off until eventually Athens was defeated and its democracy ended, and replaced by the 30 tyrants, while Sparta became the dominant leaders of Greece. After a while, the other city-states rebelled against Sparta due to their agreement with Persia, and Sparta was forced back, leading to Athens' return to power. Which rose to power, and eventually Macedon became the dominant power in the area. Now that we're done with the basic history, let's look at culture and life in Athens and Sparta. Pretty much, all of Greece followed the Hellenistic religion, with the 12 Olympians, oracles, etc. Most possibly, the two most famous religious places were the Acropolis, home of temples such as the Parthenon, which was the center of Athenian life due to it being the temple of its patron, and the nearby Erechtheion. Long walls in Athens made a passageway to the port. Plato had his academy in Athens. Athens was where most of Greece's innovators and philosophers lived, such as Plato, Aristotle, and Pythagoras. Sparta focused more on war than art. Their phalanxes and training were renowned for their effectiveness. Sparta had many victories and few losses, which were hard fought. The cities themselves looked like nothing compared to other Greek cities. They were compared to barren villages and had a theater as the main building. At birth, babies would be tested in wine, then judged by a council. If they failed, they were thrown into a chasm. Military training in the Agagi system began at age 7 and included trials such as underfeeding to encourage food theft. After that, some would be sent into the wilderness with only a knife to test survival skills. Sparta had a uniqueness in the fact that it also gave formal education to girls, minus the battle training. Once full citizenship was attained, full action in the army was required. Soldiers could only return with their shields in their hand, or victoriously, or on their shield, which meant that they were dead. Women in Sparta enjoyed much fuller rights than anywhere else. They owned much of the land in Sparta, served significant roles in history, and could go as they pleased and could take part in many male activities such as certain festivals and exercises. This was Greece, the example for all those that followed, from great war victories to revolutionary reforms to innovative philosophies. Greece was the home of the birth of modern civilization.
Kai tote de king oskon odu keti pokta belon